Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. First on the agenda is the roll call. Let the minutes show that all 5 board members are present. Next is approval of the agenda. First by Heather. Discussions or questions? Is there a second? Second by Kyle. All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to informational items. First is the energy audit discussion. Performance services, yeah, go ahead.
There is a handout on your table that looks like this. So that's what I'm going to be covering. My name is Dave Dowdell. I am a business development manager at Kentucky with Performance Services. This is Bart Stern. He's our project development engineer. We did a preliminary energy study of your district back in the spring. Delivered that report back in April, and we're here to just give you a brief overview of what we found and some of the benefits of looking at an energy project like this. Moving on to page 2 of the handout. So why consider doing a Gdsc or a guaranteed energy savings contract project? There's several advantages. This provides guaranteed energy savings to the district, and for every dollar that we guarantee of savings, the district gets $20 of funding for improvements in the district, the way these programs work. Additionally, this is not a low bid project when it comes to equipment selection. It's more around best value, best payback, best return on investment, because the savings is driving the project here. So you get more control over what equipment you get in the buildings and higher quality equipment. Also, when you do one of these projects, there's no change orders. So what you go to contract with, as far as the price, we don't come back to you later on for a change order in additional way. It's a transparent process when it comes to pricing, especially if you use the price contract approach with a pre-approved vendor with the cooperatives. And we bid everything out for you, reveal what those bids are, and the final selection is yours on what vendors we go with and what equipment we go with. So, and then there's multiple funding options on projects like this, which I'll get more into on the next slide, which is the Gdsc funding options slide. So depending on what your financial goals are, you can preserve your bond capacity, your restricted funds. I know you have a big project coming up with the intermediate school, so that may be a priority for you. These projects can be funded with what's called a general fund bond. So with guaranteed savings, you can actually bond against that savings using your general fund dollars. If you have restricted funds that you'd like to contribute to the project, you can do more work by matching those funds on what can be funded by the savings. Or you can buy the project down with the restricted fund and drive net savings to your general fund. So if it's more of a priority to try to drive net savings to your general fund, that's an option for you. And you can also do the same thing with ESSER dollars. There's certainly things that we found that would qualify for ESSER expenditures when it comes to indoor air quality and the overall health of the buildings that could be qualify for the ESSER use as well. So on the next slide, I'm just going to let Mark cover some of the things that we found when we walked through the district.
So we spent a day walking through the facilities and we caught up with Jeremy and interviewed him, talked over what the district facility plan goals are for your buildings, and we identified a number of needs or wants throughout your buildings. And this slide kind of highlights some of those that we can potentially capture and take care of as part of the project. So that's just an example of a couple we can provide.
If you wanted to touch on each one.
For example, some of them are interior and exterior LED lighting. I know that you've taken initiative to do some of that already. We would try to lead that throughout the district. Some potential HVAC upgrades. I know that some of the HVAC serving the high school classroom wing is aging, including some controls, HVAC automation controls upgrades, and potentially athletic field lighting improvements. improvements, as well as some building envelope improvements, trying to improve the comfort for some of the occupants as well.
So moving on to the goals of the district, we try to understand what some of the goals are before doing our walkthroughs. And meeting with Jeremy, his top 3 priorities were replacing any non-LED lights with LED lighting both inside and outside, expansion of the control system that controls your HVAC systems, and then, if possible, adding and replacing the athletic field lighting, as Bart mentioned. Other impacts that this project has is improved comfort and learning environment for the staff and students. Standardization of equipment and controls, because you have more control over what equipment and vendors you use. And then, of course, there's positive PR for the district because you're being good stewards for taxpayer dollars by using savings to fund improvements back in the buildings. So a little bit more about the athletic field lighting on the next slide. Generally, the scope of work is envisioned to replace the existing lights, retrofitting the football field lights with LED. But currently, the baseball and softball fields do not have lights, so that would be adding lights and poles for those fields. Now, those are challenging items to get in a guaranteed energy savings contract project. And the reason for that is there's relatively low use hours on athletic field lighting, so the payback is longer when you do a replacement. When you're adding lights where there are none, you're actually increasing utility use because there was none there before. We have been able to get athletic field lights in a previous project. It involves numerous discussions with KDE and getting their buy-in up front before you get too far down that path. There's a clause in the statute that allows for an item called capital cost avoidance savings on projects like this. That may be an avenue that we could pursue to help get that lighting in this project as well. But it would have to involve those discussions with KDE. So, moving on to other items, in addition to the ones that we talked about, replacing the transformers in the building, there's generally a good payback on those. Bart mentioned upgrading some of the heating and cooling equipment, building envelope, weatherization of the buildings, water conservation, there's generally a good payback on water conservation. Supply side energy management, that is basically what you pay utility rates. Sometimes you can find savings with the rates that you pay. And then solar, we did take a cursory look at adding solar to the district. And on the next slide is a summary of what we found. The initial analysis revealed a payback of just over 20 years, which in order to include it in a project, Gdsc has to be under 20 years. It's close. It may be worth taking another look at if you choose to move forward to see if we can get the cost down, get the savings up, close that gap a little bit. You can see on the picture these would be rooftop mount solar panels on your buildings. I believe your roofs are relatively new on those buildings, so that shouldn't be an issue. And that is to scale about how much roof area would be used for the solar panels. We've done 2 roof mount solar projects in Kentucky, a couple of buildings with Covington and then most recently we installed on the middle school in Fairview. So just some benefits of the solar. Once the bonds retired after the first 20 years, the net savings to the district over the next 10 years is a net $800,000 of free energy basically to the district. These are long life systems, 30 to 40 years, minimal maintenance, and you'll see that we only sized this to offset about 78% of the building usage. And the reason for that is you really don't want to overproduce with solar. You want to use what you produce, because when you put it back on the grid, the utility company doesn't really give you retail value in Kentucky for that. So it's always a balance of right sizing that system.
Other states?
Other states have more attractive net metering rules. So
that's a possibility in the future.
that is, yes. And also with battery storage, that technology coming along, and the cost coming down, you could increase the size of the system. This is scalable, and you can store any excess energy and then use it at night or period upgrades when the solar system isn't producing. So another big advantage of that is that you're taking control of your energy production for that 78%. So you're not at the mercy of utility rate increases from the utility company. For that portion at least, you're controlling your energy future and your costs. So more predictable costs in the future. Overall financial summary on the next slide, not including solar, just the base measures like lighting and controls and things like that. Generally, we projected that you would save almost $71,000 a year in year one on utility savings. And then we calculated a little over $13,000 a year in operations and maintenance savings for a total of just over $84,000. This is money that you're spending today, so even if you chose not to move forward with this project, that is an expenditure that you're having now. You're just paying it in utility costs and maintenance costs. If you can redirect that back using one of these programs, it would fund almost $1.7 million in improvements to the district. So that's the second to last number there. If we could get solar in the project, you could self-fund as much as $3 million of improvements to the district. So where do you go from here? The first step in the process is pretty straightforward. All you got to do is send a letter to KDE that says, we want to do a guaranteed energy savings contract. The other item that you need to do is just an initial BG1 that's got budgetary pricing for the project. It's got an overview of the scope, kind of where your funding is coming from and what buildings are impacted. That's all we need to get started. From there, we do detailed engineering and development, put together bid packages, bid everything out to contractors and vendors, pull all that information together into a contract for your review and approval. And then once you review and approve that, it goes to KDE for review and approval. Once they've approved it, then you can schedule the bond sale, execute the contract, and get started on the project. So you're probably looking at late spring if you said go next month to have all that done. The next slide just gives you an overview of some recent Kentucky projects that we've done. We completed a project with Ballard County Schools, Covington, Fairview. Those are both solar installations. Grant County Schools, there's a brochure for both Covington and Grant County Schools on the table for your review. Did 2 phases with Clark County Schools. We're actually doing a second phase with Covington, Garrett County Schools, and Marshall County Schools. That's all I have. Do you want to answer questions?
I have a question on the slide 5, south-facing windows. Is that something? What would you be doing? Are you replacing windows and putting like low heat windows in, or shades, or?
My understanding of that area is that it is very difficult to keep it cool in summer because they're all south facing. You're getting a lot of heat gain from the summer. So initial thought would be potentially adding window film to the windows, so not actually replacing the windows, adding film to reduce that heat gain, heater gain, just trying to make that space more comfortable.
Any other questions? No?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for your time, appreciate it. Thank you. If you guys wanted to exit, you could. I'm not gonna make you sit through this if you don't want to. It's up to you, though. You're more welcome to stay if you like. Next on the informational items is discuss the bus driver salary information. So Chris.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to start by saying thanks to the board for the approval of our full-time sub-position last month. I'm glad to say we were able to fill that position already. And also last month's meeting was expressed an interest in reviewing pay scales for school bus drivers in our area. So everyone should have a copy of our Excel sheet there. You can see on the left the years of experience and our current scale for bus drivers and how that corresponds to our neighbors. Also worth noting is that historically, we've brought new drivers in and started them on 4-hour contracts or 4.5-hour contracts. And in speaking with the Director of Transportation in Boone County, Kent County, Campbell County, they're starting everybody at 5 or 5.25 hours per day. So it's easy to see as you go across the zero experience line that we fall on the lowest mark voted for hourly rate. And that a little bit compounded just based on the amount of hours that our big brothers are able to give to the new employees. Just a little other number for you here, a 1-year salary at zero experience at $15.30 an hour, that's about $11,000 for a bus driver with no experience. So this is what I was able to come up with. They're all current pay scales for the 21-22 school year. We had talked about getting some information from like Dollar General or Amazon, but once I was pulling the pay scales from our neighbors, it was pretty clear that we were comparing the same job with the same job in our area. So if anybody has any questions, we're going to have to answer them. I believe Kevin mentioned at a meeting that this is something potentially that's going to be looked at as far as classified pay, but nothing would happen this year. It sounds like it'll be next year, and will be included for potential updates or salary schedule changes.
What's the green?
I'm sorry.
What's the green highlights? Like,
Okay, so in the first column at 1624, that's our step 3 or 4th year. If you go straight across the line, that's where we exceed that district. So Grant County, we beat them in Williamstown, we surpassed them. So just go straight across the column, that's where we beat
makes
them.
sense now. I'm just like, I was trying to follow the other down. I don't know where we're going with this.
And if you notice, our closest neighbors, Boone, Kenton, and who else we touched, Gallatin. If you look down the line, we're at 23 years with Boone and Gallatin, 28 years with Kenton County. So we're always behind.
Well, in all fairness with Gallatin, they just did an emergency $5 an hour raise at the beginning of the year because they had no bus
I know
drivers.
they had some.
So they went straight across the board, $5. Yeah,
So they went from 1501 behind us to 2001
Yes.
ahead of us.
yeah, they did it right. We didn't have to have any experience, you got automatic $20 an hour. They had no bus drivers, well, they had.
Yeah, that's how that
Yeah. So you're telling me that that Kevin's, no, Kevin's not here.
That's what I was thinking.
We're not, going to look at readjusting this, correct, until April 1st, and then it'll be in the 2022 calendar year?
Yes, so my understanding is it would be this April for review and then for next year.
So I would like
I mean, that's all up to us, right?
I mean, well, what I would like to see, if that's how it has to be due to budget, and again, Kevin's not here, this is unfortunate, if this is how it has to be due to budget already being made and all, I know in the past, when we wanted to give teachers raises, and we weren't able to necessarily have that reoccurring expense every year, at the end of the year, the last check in December, we did a one-time bonus per se, of an amount. Is that something that we could do to kind of equal this playing field a little bit?
That is, like Kyle said, that is a board decision. But my recommendation to the board is if you decide to do that, you need to do it for all employees, not just the bus drivers. I've been involved in situations in the past where one employee group gets a percentage raise or a bonus and other employee groups didn't, and that created issues within the district.
I understand that, but haven't we given everybody else? We just adjusted cafeteria. We just adjusted all the teachers. We just adjusted the rank, what was it, 4 or?
I believe in the salary scales that we approved last spring for this school year, all employee groups received some sort of pay raise.
Okay, so the bus drivers were included in that, we're still behind?
Yeah.
They were.
Putting in bus drivers. I would also add, board policy gives the superintendent the latitude to grant previous years of experience on the salary scale. Typically, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but when we hire a bus driver, It is not someone who is brand new. We don't typically start people out with 0 years experience. I have the latitude, according to board policy, to grant prior years of experience. And if someone can document prior years of experience, being what I'll call a professional driver, I always grant them that experience. So they may not enter at 15, 30 to 0 years experience. If I can document 10 years of experience, they're entering in 1866. One of our big issues, in my opinion, is that because of our size, we pay drivers 4 hours a day. Okay? Like Chris said, Kenton, Campbell, and Boone are paying drivers between 5, 5.5, or even 6 hours a day. So not only are we behind on the hourly wage, they're getting paid anywhere from 1 to 2 extra hours per day. So that's also an issue.
How do we pay them? Do we pay them from the time they get in to pick up their bus to the time they turn it in? Morning and afternoon?
Yes,
So it's like 2 hours in the morning.
I know, but it's not even like 2 hours in the morning.
it varies.
Yeah.
And I've got some routes that run right 4 hours a day, others run 5.
Yeah.
So it does vary.
What is our average years of experience?
I do not have that information. I'm not sure if Rick is there or not.
She's a Casper
Okay,
also.
okay. That was something I was going to pull, but I didn't have that.
I can say, because at some point, we're like pretty even. If we're very heavy on the new side and lacking getting people in here, then obviously we need to do something about that. But if all of them, we're at, 13, 15, 19 years of experience, we're right there.
Once you get past 5 years, you're pretty similar in most areas. It's really the first 5 years where the biggest discrepancy for
We've been fortunate in recent years to pull from other districts, majority of them in county. Where this hurts us, and you can see what their scale is versus ours, so like for like on years of experience, they can take that account. But we made it.
Yeah, but they're coming.
Yeah.
What I can share with the board in my email to you tomorrow is the average years of experience of our bus drivers. And also, we can go back and look at, let's say, the 10 most recent bus drivers we've hired. Where did they enter the salary scale? You know, if they had previous experience, the gentleman we just hired, how many years of experience did he have, Chris? Do you recall?
I want to say we placed him at very close to 15 years.
So the other thing I would like to see is the last 10 people we lost and where they ended up at.
So.
If there's a way of finding that out, because it's not about getting them, it's about where they're going. Why are we having these new ones?
So 2 years ago, I had 3 folks, 2 retire, and the third left due to personal reasons. At the start of this year, I had 2 leave. One became a truck driver here in Walt, where they're being paid $20 an hour as a regional job. And then I had another one who left to drive a dump truck, making almost $27 an hour. Still using the commercial license, but not transporting cities.
Right.
So we're not losing bus drivers to other bus driver jobs.
Yeah, and that's helpful to know. Yeah, and we're getting them here and we're retaining them once they're here, that's good. We're having a problem hiring them, is that the thing? Like, we put out an ad and they go, I'm gonna go to Kenton County and make $10 more an hour.
I think that's a majority of them, aside from the fact that everyone is struggling to get bus drivers. So
Everybody's struggling
the
to
draw we usually pull from Kent County is not quite there because they're struggling themselves, so. Question?
Board members, I'll get you some additional information on average years of experience, the last 10 drivers we hired, where they entered the salary scale, and the last 10 drivers, if we can, I'll have to work with Brittany on that, but the last 10 drivers we lost, where did they go? Was it to another district driving a bus? Was it, dump truck, forklift, what have you? To give you that information.
So, I guess I got one more question then. So like, if you're putting out these ads for drivers, is there times that you offer jobs and then they're no longer there? Do you document, like, they turned me down, they went to Campbell County or Gallatin, you know, we lost 3 because Gallatin offered them $5 more?
No, because like I said, majority are coming from a district already.
Okay.
So, in the most recent hires that have come from another district, I'm getting paid more where I'm at. But, there's always a but, so it's kind of an on the fence type decision.
They have buses.
They do. Oh, no, they don't. We have better buses.
There's that too.
Thanks for pulling that
Yeah,
information
thank you.
together.
Thank you.
All right, next is the principals, the ECC, and the bridge report.
Good evening, everyone. A couple big things to point out from the elementary report. We have our K-Prep data that I did want to get to review with you all in person. There were some things in there that were a struggle for us, but we saw struggles across the state as a result of the pandemic, but there were certain things in there that I would consider a big win for us. So some of the things that we saw that were a concern at the elementary was that we did have an increase in novice in pretty much every category, which was also followed by a decrease in proficiency and in distinguished as well. And one of the things that I did notice in this was that reading seemed to take a little bit more of a hit than what we did in math. And I got some more comments on thoughts on that in here in just a second. But if you go down to that second chart where I have state comparisons of what we did, we're still sitting pretty well compared to the rest of the state in terms of our students that were proficient and distinguished. When you look at that state data and how significantly they dropped in 3rd and 4th grade, both reading and math and science, it was quite significant. And then the part that is, in my mind, something that is super exciting, and I think a testament to the dedication of our teachers as we got through the pandemic, was how we compare to other schools in reading and math compared to the rest of the state. So some of the highlights on there, you can see I compared the 18-19 school year, which was last time we had K-Cup data, to what we did this past spring. And we usually outperformed about 2/3 of the state on average, around 65–70% in all different categories. But for this particular year, in overall for reading, it was 78%. We outperformed all other 3rd grade groups across the state. All other elementary schools across the state is 84% 3rd grade, 75% 4th. And then in math, we outperformed 86% of all other Kentucky elementary schools with 79% 3rd grade, and then 91%. We did better than 91% of all other 4th grade groups. And then in science, we saw an increase in that as well, where we outperformed about 2/3 of the state. So there are some things that we are still working on. We got some stuff in place at the elementary to help us go. Keep an eye on that. The other part that is related to that I want to point out is what we're doing with our K-Prep data in comparison to math. So I did this a couple years ago where math gives us a projection, and it's usually around about 80% accurate. So I ran those same numbers again, and it was odd because reading dropped to an accuracy rate of about 59%. We had a lot of students that underperformed on K-Prep and reading compared to what their spring math was telling us that they were going to do. So I'm looking into what possible causes there could be on that. I think one potential cause is that it is a new testing format that we're looking at, and this is specifically looking at our 3rd graders. So they're now taking the test on a Chromebook as opposed to a booklet test. And then in that reading test particularly, in a booklet situation, they're able to maybe kind of search through the passage more easily to get back to the questions as opposed to navigating on a device when they're doing that. The other thing that is something that I've considered is that students may be more comfortable with handwriting their responses, but now when they tackle these open response questions, that they're going to have to use a type pad. So these are all things that we're going to be addressing at the elementary school to make sure that these tests reflect what they know, because that's, you know, for me as a principal, the thing that is one of my bigger fears is that a test doesn't actually give a good indication of what our students know. So we are learning some new stuff with formats. When you're talking with younger kids that are still kind of learning, you know, the lay of the keyboard, it does become a little bit of a challenge. And the reason I think all that for reading is because in math we saw pretty fairly similar results to what we had a couple years ago with our accuracy rate being pretty close on that. I'm also working on putting together the last year's fourth grade students, current fifth grade students, and Mr. Morwell to kind of give him an idea of being able to identify students that maybe underperform. Let's figure out why they underperform. Was it something in terms of the gap in the content, or was it learning how to do the test in a new way? So, and then one last little part that I did want to share with you, and this isn't on your report, was we did get to do our first AR night last week, the first one in a long time. Our school's so big now at the point, at this point, we've decided to split it to make it a little bit more reasonable, that way we don't have people working in the grass and stuff like that. Our friends on Border Road happy. And we had 69 students show up in third and fourth grade. It was a veteran-themed AR night. That gets me here. I got a lot of veterans in the family, and we had veterans come out and read to students and share some of their stories, and it was a great event. So that's it for the elementary report. Questions for me?
So you just touched on the AR for the older kids. When is one slated for the younger kids?
We are looking at March, so we're kind of easing our way back in instead of coming in full steam with everything. That's Dr. Seuss's birthday. We kind of figure that's a pretty big deal for our younger students. Fourth and third and fourth graders will be excited, but they want to do is really the Dr. Seuss special. So we've already got that in pencil, and we are kind of waiting to see how things go in the winter on that. But that is the plan right now, is to do they want to do.
Pre-COVID, how many AR nights did we do?
We're doing, by the time
3 or 4.
I got there, it was like 4 a year. So,
I'm glad to get them back. I'm just thinking like the second grader hasn't ever had one.
no, yeah, so, and they were getting, they were huge events. I mean, we were having,
Oh, yeah.
you couldn't really walk through the hallways. And so, even before COVID, my first year there, I was talking to the teachers, and I was like, we might need to split this, because it's so many people here. And it's not like Fall Festival, we cram them all in the building, so
Great.
it's a lot of people packed in that building. Other questions? Thank you.
Good evening. I've kind of summarized what I shared with staff on our conducted summative assessment data. Some good things on there. I was very proud of what we've done with writing, especially since they did do it on the computer. With our 8th grade scores where they were over 25% higher than the state average. Our novices were really low in writing as well. That was one area where it's very low. Looking at 5th grade writing, only 3% novice. That's over 12.5% better than the state average. That was pretty impressive from the writing program. Our students have always done pretty well on that science assessment, and while that proficient distinguished percentage doesn't seem high, that is, again, over 10% higher than the state average. Our students have always done well. That test is difficult. It's a much different format than test than it used to. So we've done well there. Some good highlights in reading. Our proficient distinguished aren't where they normally are, but again, scores above state average. The reading percent above state average for 7th grade was our big highlight. Math has been our area of focus for a couple years now, and there are some signs of some positive things going there. Our novice rates are better than state average. They're definitely not where we want them to be. The one impressive highlight there was the proficient distinguished for our students with disabilities. 25% of our students, and we've had years here where we haven't had maybe but one, maybe none proficient distinguished. So that was a nice highlight for math. Some areas for improvement across the board. A very big chunk of students are at the apprentice level. Pretty similar to what we saw with our math data. The 19-20 school year, we lost over 25% of that school year. Last year, in talking with Dr. Baker, our kids that came in person had about 70 days of instruction. So the days that they were here and what they got something, but it seems like a lot of kids are stuck in that apprentice area, and we saw that in our spring math testing as well. So that's a focus in all areas. Our special ed students and our free reduced lunch students are not performing where we want them to be. Those are our gap groups in reading. In math, the overall proficient distinguished is not even close to where we want it to be. We were above state average in all areas except 8th grade math. I know we don't like to compare ourselves just to the state, but I think what our teachers were doing during the pandemic was better than what most kids were getting, but it still didn't replace being in person. I don't have it here, but Mr. Patterson had alluded to it. Dr. Baker had given us some data on how we compare regionally with our scores, and in most areas we were 3rd regionally, and no worse than 6th out of 18 schools in every grade level. So, we still compared where we normally expect in most areas regionally, even despite the struggles with the pandemic. On the second page, before I go into the student survey, just some of the things we're doing for achievement for next steps. We've had our workshop model classroom initiative, along with incorporating those other pieces that I have listed there. Our paving structures are still very much alive. We had another paving training this past summer before we started school. Our collaborative work in the classes with our special ed. We incorporated some new things last year. It wasn't the best year to necessarily incorporate some new things, but those are continuing this year. We did see that nice little highlight in 6th grade math with our special ed students. And so those are some things that we will stay the course with and make our adjustments. We don't want to throw everything out. We did make some changes to a couple things. It's been called Bearcat Special over the years. It's been called RTI. They've ended up with negative connotations with the time that we have every day for 25 minutes. So kind of rebranding that Bearcat Extension Time with the expectation the focus is on math and reading growth, not just for the students that have struggled, but for all students. Some examples of some things we're doing on there. In 6th grade, the reading and writing teacher have looked at their math data and their Kentucky Center of Assessment data, and they have formed groups to work with. A lot of students are in the novice area there to work on skill remediation there. Other grade levels all have plans for math and reading, and they are using that data. We do have our fall math data that has a couple of little signs of some better data than what we got, but we still have a lot of work to do. And one of the areas that we're looking at is that Bearcat extension to focus on that growth and the recouping of skills that weren't learned over the last 2 school years. We also still have our social emotional learning that addresses climate and culture. We do that once a week during that time. The other 4 days are used, as I described before, we're working on math and reading support. RTI took a little bit of a hit last year with the way the schedule had to be between hybrid and everything else. The schedule this year has tier 2 back to how it normally was. We did some adjustments because that occurs on the concourse schedule, and that was a little bit of a struggle at first with the bouncing back and forth between virtual and hybrid, and then being back relatively normal. Tier 3, regained that focus, pretty much lost a year with a lot of the tier 3 services because of how the school year went. Math scores, we now have the Edgenuity programming that we're using in middle school, and it directly links to the math scores, so that's another layer of trying to get some of that student ownership, because we're using that program in the Bearcat extension at times to help individualize the instruction for the student based on where they're at. Something I don't have on here is we do have, for math, we have added the math specialist to teaching 4 classes a day in advanced math, which allows some of the other groups to be smaller. And then our ELA specialist is teaching 4 reading classes of some of our struggling learners that are smaller classes to work on those students that are kind of in that novice apprentice area where we saw some heavier areas, so that we can have smaller classes, 12, 15 kids in their reading class to try to get that those skills up that are stuck in apprentice. That also allows us, so each one of those is teaching 1 section at each grade level, And during those lines, that allows the other classes to be a little bit smaller too. So just trying to look at ways to work on student skill based on the data that we have, and also trying to replicate some of what we got during the pandemic with hybrid. Having smaller classes was actually kind of nice. It was just tough because when we have a couple days a week, having the students there in person. So those are some of the adjustments we've made to look at what has been lost, but overall, it's not all doom and gloom, but yes, there's plenty of work to still do. And that's where we are with the achievement. The culture and climate survey was quite impressive for us. There was 34 questions on the climate and culture survey. And you can look down at the celebration areas. A lot of very positive feedback from our students. I mean, you give 10 to 14-year-olds a survey to tell them how they think their school is and how the teachers are doing. That can make you a little nervous, but you know, our kids feel pretty good about our school. You know, the teachers expect my best, 97%, so our kids know that the teachers expect the best out of them. That's a pretty nice number to have. Students feeling safe in class. There is the one on the second page there. If bullied, there is a safe way to inform adults. You know, over 93% of the students say, yes, there's a way to do it. The next challenge is getting 10 to 14-year-olds to actually report it. Sometimes can be frustrating. So that's another thing that we're going to address through our SEL program. Wasn't in that data, but it's always good to note our attendance rate for a middle school at 96.1% back in 1920 is very impressive for a middle school, no matter where they are. And that just shows our kids want to be at school. Some of the areas for improvement with kids today, you know, bullying is always an issue. Truly defining bullying, sometimes we'll get in conversations with kids and parents that everything is automatically bullying. And a lot of times it's just bullying type behavior without being truly bullying, but when we do have cases of bullying, we take it very seriously. We take every report seriously. So some of that is just the vocabulary used between mean behavior and bullying behavior, but we have that social media piece. And you can see that internet bullying among females is significantly higher than males, and that's really tough to police. But it is something we deal with. It was interesting that adults respecting students' differences was 93% positive, while students respecting others' differences was only 37%. So what I told the teachers is, hey, we're modeling it, now what can we do to get the students to follow through on respecting others' differences? And so we talked about that a little bit. It was also interesting to see that almost 25% of the students felt like adults did not stay calm when dealing with bad behavior. You know, there's probably a couple times when a teacher maybe overreacts to something, but I also talked to students and say, well, they were yelling at me. That's yelling, or were they yelling, or just, it's really them just perceiving that they're being yelled at when an adult is correcting their behavior, because I rarely hear anybody yelling at anybody. So it's kind of discussion, but it is something that we shared with staff and kind of talked about on that survey, but for the most part, that was pretty positive. Question?
Is there any way to get that, just the survey that you sent out? We see the responses, but like, I'm curious what the questions were.
I can share the full results with the board. There's no.
No, I just, you said there's 34 questions.
He just wants to know the question.
What the
Oh, yeah.
questions were.
Yeah, I'd like to see him.
We can get that to you. I mean, I've got a spreadsheet that shows the responses for every question. It breaks it down, male, female, everything, but I can get you a copy of the middle school one that just shows the overall 34 questions and how the whole student population. There's no information on it that you would be able to see because it doesn't have student names, so I'll be happy to share that everything. I'll share it with Dr. Baker. Perfect.
Excuse me, can parents also get a copy of that survey?
I will have to find out that answer. I don't have a problem sharing the questions.
About the survey.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing confidential, so.
I'd just like to look at it. I'd like to also know who wrote the survey and who initiated the survey and how long that survey has been in effect. That's what I'm curious to know, so parents would like to see that. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
I have just a general question, probably more for Matt. When I see this, the adults stay calm and dealing with bad behavior, I know kids can overreact, but I look at the high school, and so this is also an issue in the high school that shows up on the survey, that that's what they're saying there too. So when I see that, it's like a trend through 5th through 12th grade.
Right.
And just thinking like broader in terms of issues that we see cropping up this year. This, I think, is something we need to focus on. How do we, like, what does this mean and how do we solve? So I don't know if there's follow-up questions that we can do, like a sensing survey, or like, what does this mean that adults aren't feeling? They're not staying calm and dealing with bad behavior, because that can exacerbate the situation and make something that's not a big deal turn into a big deal, and, you know, fighting and when does horseplay turn into real fighting, and fighting turn into like bullying that happens. And I think this kind of thing, to me, that just speaks volumes that there's something else there that's not just kid focused.
Okay. Sure. I meet with a group of students on a regular basis, and that'll be a great topic of discussion with those students.
Is the high school and middle school survey the same?
I haven't seen a high school.
I believe it
Well,
is.
we have it.
Oh, it's the same, I haven't seen the results.
Yeah, the questions piled on slide 4.
Okay.
Yes, if they're the same, I just didn't know if they were.
David, in
Obviously,
response to
there's
your
also-
question, I have talked with Dr. Baker quite a bit about, us dealing with behavior and the things that we've been dealing with. And the last 2 PLCs that I've had with teachers have been centered on looking at the code of conduct and levels of offenses and just reviewing that, which is a good exercise for teachers. We've done that before. And then just yesterday, we went through addressing some of the behaviors we're seeing in the middle school, but we want to be very clear on how we want to address those. And it's a very small percentage of students that's causing these behaviors, but a behavior we see in a 5th grade classroom versus one we see in an 8th grade classroom is also dramatically different. But we also don't want 1% to dictate what happens with the other 99%. So we took some time to really look now that we're back in school full, and it looks good that we stay this way. We want to make sure that those things get addressed the longer we're in school, because kids are learning how to be students again, but we're not going to allow them to use what has happened over the last 2 years as an excuse. We're going to work on that, because our kids that do follow rules most of the time deserve us to be very consistent with that.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying that an adult hasn't
Sure.
lost it in a moment in dealing with something. We've all been human, but it's not like we've got teachers running down the hall pulling their hair out, but we do work with teachers on how to deal, because there's ways that you can, like somebody just used the word escalate something. You can diffuse something very easily without making it worse than what it really is, and we work on that with teachers.
Yep. And I
But I do agree that there could be more that we can look
yeah,
at.
and I was just asking because I had looked at the survey results there, and it was like, you're seeing a lot of the things that are similar, like both in middle school and high school, so whatever it is, those students aren't always interactive. It's not like they got together and colluded and said, let's all say the teachers are yelling. It's real, whatever that means. But as a parent, I know sometimes if I say, man, you shouldn't have done that, my school says, why are you yelling at me? It's like, when I yell, I didn't even raise my voice, I just asked you a question. So it's just more sensing on like, is it that, or is it really like, no, this person yelled at me, or, I thought the punishment was way too harsh for what I did, and there were 5 other kids doing the same thing. And because that, I don't remember if it was on boards or on high school, but that's also a question where it was like negative, where kids are saying they don't believe the punishment is always the same for the students. Different students are treated differently. I think it was on the high school survey.
And most kids know that when that's not happening. So, there is some value in listening to students. I have my principal's advisory council that I can have discussions with too. An educated guess based on what I see every day, it's not 25%. There's probably a lower percentage that we don't deal with appropriately. We're all human. That's where we learn to deal with it better. I always use the example of my own kids. I love them, but there's times at home that they do some things, and I just want to. But you gotta.
Yep.
Most of the time, the behavior of the student has nothing to do with the adult in the room. There's something else going on.
Sure.
And so that's the biggest message we'll send to teachers. It's not always you, but the adult can either add to it or help diffuse it. And sometimes that's where I think we do at times, depending on the situation, have opportunity to let the kids perceive we don't handle it well, whether perception or real.
Yep. Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
And I'll get that to Dr. Baker first thing in the morning.
Thank you. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here. All right, so just going over our high school data, we have state testing area ACT. So I'll just go through it briefly here. This first slide kind of outlines how the test is divvied up for high school and how those scores are calculated. There was no overall accountability rating due to the virus. The test also had a reduced number of questions. So looking at it for the total calculation of the scores, 45% of the overall test scores was based on proficiency of reading and math in 10th grade. The 15% was 11th grade social studies and science and writing. There was no growth calculation in there. Quality of school climate was 4%. For whatever reason, we don't know why they did not include transition readiness in the calculation this year. There was no reason given. And then our graduation rate accounted for 6% of that as well. So moving on to the next part, the student participation rate on the state assessment. It gives hours in comparison to the state. So if you were a virtual learner all last year, you had to make a good faith effort to come in. So that's why where you see state, there's 76%, 75%. So if you were a virtual learner all last year, you did not necessarily have to come in. So that's why the state's percentages are lower. Thankfully for us, we got the majority of our students, virtual or not, to come in and take our test. So that was a really good thing there. Next, looking at the graduation rate portion of it. We had a 100% graduation rate last year. The state average is 90%. So all of our students, when they started as freshmen, they completed their 4 years, 100% of them. 5-year graduation rate, we had 99% of them. So we had a student that did not, from the previous year, that did not graduate with the 4-year cohort, they did end up, 99% of them did end up graduating in that 5th year. And the state average on that last year was 92%. So that's just a little bit about the graduation rate and how the test is calculated. This goes into the actual test scores, so that proficiency, looking at the grade 10 reading and math. The first couple of columns, we have the R scores and the state scores. So for reading, we were 24% novice, 31% apprentice, 24% proficient, and 20% distinguished. That orange column there, that is the percentage of students on free and reduced lunch and how they scored. So when we're looking at like different gap groups and everything, that kind of gives us a good idea of what to target and who to target. Those scores in comparison to the state were obviously better. Looking at the grade 10 math, obviously math is an area of growth for us. 25% were novice compared to 35 in the state, 36% were apprentice compared to 34, 33 compared to 24, and then distinguished was 5.8. Obviously, we want that proficient and distinguished to be a lot higher, and that's a focus for us is to move novice to apprentice, apprentice to proficient, and to continue to move those levels. And I'll talk about how we're going to do that here shortly.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Go ahead.
How come we don't have the italics for the gap group? Because we were concentrating on.
For whatever reason, the state did not include the gap group scores for math and science. We do not know. So the separate academic indicator that goes into the science and the on-demand portion. Science scores 17 to 30% were novice, 45% apprentice, 34 proficient, distinguished is 3.5 again. Our goal is to get that proficient, distinguished group higher. Our writing scores are what we're really proud of. Obviously, we have a lot of growth in other areas, but looking at our scores from that, our proficient, distinguished, 77% of our students, the junior students, were proficient or distinguished on our writing test last year. So that's definitely an area of strength for us. And our goal is to continue, not just do it in English classes and social studies, but we want our math teachers to write. We want our, and all of our electives, that's a focus of ours. So we're going to continue working on that as well. So the writing scores were very encouraging, obviously. looking at that gap group, 60% of them were proficient in distinguished in writing, so that's definitely an area of strength for us. You go to the next slide, ACT scores. The black column is our scores last year, the orange column is screen reduced lunch. We also added in what those results were looking like prior to COVID. So the last time they took those, that last group without an interrupted school year took those. So that's what the green column is what the 18-19 juniors scored on the ACT. So we had a dip everywhere compared to where we were in 18-19. Obviously with all the changes and all the disruption that's happened in the past couple of years, that's obviously not solely to blame, but that's where we need to go. So when looking at the benchmark, so the benchmark category over there, 18 is the benchmark in English, 19 is the benchmark in math, and 20 is the benchmark score in reading. So 58% of our students got at least an 18 on the ACT, 42% scored at least a 19 on the ACT, and then 60% scored that 20 benchmark on reading. So obviously all of those are higher than the state, but you know, when we look at where we were in 18-19, it's a drop off, and that's something that we want to address on that. So not only that, those are just junior ACT scores. We also focus on seniors, so senior ACT scores are not included in that. We do have a senior ACT class that we focus on in the seminar. We're also having an ACT boot camp. I think that is currently going on over the next couple of weeks. So ACT is not always just focused on the juniors. You know, we try and get the seniors benchmark as well, but those senior scores are not calculated in this accountability section. So next slide down there, that's the school climate survey that was given. And again, this is only a reflection of 10th and 11th graders that took it. So this is not school-wide. This was sophomores and juniors, so current juniors and seniors this year. Obviously, looking at that, so you have the questions right there. A big green for us, a big plus was obviously feeling safe in school, feeling safe in your classes, my school being a caring place. Those are all big highlights. A concern for us was question 4 there. A teacher or some other adult from my school will care if I miss a day. And then adults from my school care about me. Those are obviously the things that jumped out for us on that. And you know, thinking about it too, those virtual learners, we had a lot of virtual learners. I think we had over 120 virtual learners. So thinking about it in terms of that, students that are at home, you know, being able to have a connection with the teacher, there's a lot of challenges. Not saying it's not possible, but that's obviously one of the pluses of being back in school and being able to have that connection with those teachers. So it's something we're working on with that. Nothing really else that jumped out on there. And again, you guys can read through there. If you have any questions, we can discuss those at the end. So outside of that, looking back, COVID obviously had a huge impact, but again, that's not an excuse for us. We're going to move forward. We're going to address these gaps. Everybody's dealing with it. It's not just a Walt specific deal with it. So looking at the scores, being able to adapt, move forward, what we're going to do to make it better, and you know, get everybody's better. You know, our focus this year is on school culture. We've got our clubs back. We want kids to be involved. Not everybody's involved in athletics. We encourage, you know, involvement across the board. So we really want to encourage kids and with those clubs and different things we're trying to do with the seminar to encourage that participation. And the last slide there, looking forward, how we're going to address these gaps. Teach the Kentucky academic standards. So what we're doing, especially in our math school, our math department, we're aligning all of our assessment questions with, we have to mark, the teachers are going to be marking each question with a specific standard that it addresses, and they're able to track that and go formative, so they're able to get live updates, how the students are going on specific standards, and how we're going to address those needs. That kind of goes into the next one. We use our Wednesday PLC times for those late start Wednesdays to work in departments to analyze that data and the standards as departments. Obviously using as much instructional time as possible. We have an idea to do department data retreats, getting half-day subs for English department and then half-day subs for math. So they can really identify those gap kids, look at these scores, identify those kids that need that extra time. And what we can do to move those kids, and obviously bring us to proficient and to continue to grow. And I think it's important to grow our proficient kids and distinguished kids, not just, all kids are important, and so we can make sure we're focusing on all of them. So we're currently looking at and reviewing our master schedule. We need to build in a remediation time. So we're reviewing that and looking at how we can best optimize our instruction minutes. We're going to build that in next year. We have a potential new math course in lieu of Algebra 2 is not going to be a requirement, so we're able to be flexible with a math course on that for next year. So again, that's just a potential. We're just looking at it with the new schedule if whatever changes that are decided on. And then lastly, read and write in every class, even in math class. I was an old math teacher, and kids never like to write in math class. So it's important to write in every class, and our strength is our writing, so we're going to continue to do that and encourage it across all programs. That is all I have. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Good to see you.
All right, I am in the preschool. We're working on our December 1 child count and also the fall enrollment for preschool. And so I kind of shared some of that initial data with you guys. It breaks down what our enrollment looks like at the preschool. So it tells us the students that we have that are at risk, and qualified, who are at risk, and we have 5 of those. And then it breaks down our disabilities into 3 categories. We've got the speech and language, a mild, moderate, and then also a severe category. So I've got our numbers there for each one of those. And it also breaks it down for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So you can take a look at those numbers, but speech and language is at 49. Our moderate is at 11, and we have 3 severe. Again, this is not the most current. It'll be December 1st will be the most, that's when it's actually, the data is actually approved. But just looking at the totals, our total disability number is 63, 5 at risk, so that leaves us with 68 that are eligible for the state-funded preschool program. And then our other number, our tuition students, we have 19, so that's 87 total in our program. So that's an increase of 13 from this count last year, but again, we have since added some, so we'll have more up-to-date numbers in December, but I wanted to go ahead and put that number on your radar. And then that's also, which I think is important to note, an increase of 14 of our state-funded students from this time last year. So that's just a breakdown of our numbers. Other news here at the ECC, we did have a teacher that resigned, so we had some movement that's happening. One of our instructional aides is actually enrolled in an NET program, so she is now taking over for that teacher that resigned. So that's Katie Simmons. She is our new IEC teacher. She was working in the classroom though as an instructional aide, so then that leaves that position open. And we have a transfer within a district, Brandy Frost is going to be filling that position. She's coming from the elementary school cafeteria. So you see the domino effect there, how that all rolls out, but we're good here at the ECC. I think both of those ladies are going to do a great job for us. So. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on, some of the principles, and obviously it's something that we're talking about a lot. central office is just our math and what we can do. And we realize that it does start in early childhood. So we have some ideas of what we can do too to help with that. One thing that our regional cooperative is doing is they're this summer going to have, it's called the Erickson Early Math Collaborative. So we hope to send all of our teachers to that. So to share some of the things that they work on, but it's lessons that they learn. You know, they get materials to try to help with each of those topics. So we are happy to help with that, and we know it starts early. So that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions for me? Thank you.
Continuing on here, our reports from the bridge program. We have included a few more boys to our program there. You can see we're up to 11 now total at this point. But our guys are doing a great job. You can see that we've passed some considerable number of high school courses there by several of our boys there. So they're very excited about that with them. And we're kind of just to point out to the group, we're sort of re-emphasizing re-networking, I guess you could say, with North Key at this point. They've committed to trying to find more help on their end so that they can service more kids on our end. So at this point, we're sort of referring kids, back in another phase of referring kids at this point. And plus, we've added some kids to the mix too. So hopefully that will be an ongoing successful venture for us. Thanks to Kate, who initially got that off the ground. And then you can read about the celebration there at the bottom of my page there. We're very excited for one particular young man who's done a great job. This was his first year with us this year. So come a very long way and seems to be motivated to see it through to the end. So we're very glad about that. That's about all I've got for the bridge part. Okay, moving into our attendance percentage winner for month 3 remains with our middle school. So congratulations, middle school.
I know we're trophy.
You got a trophy. We'll bring it next time.
He didn't even bring it.
Don't lose it.
He wasn't even worried about it.
Great. The other schools are not far behind, as you can see there, so we're still clipping along. We do see a slight decrease there in our attendance percentages. You can sort of follow along there from the first month all the way out to where we are now. There's a slight decline there, but we have just here about a week and a half ago, I did meet the assistant principals to identify students who are in that range of being truant or really truant, I guess, to start working on some modes of intervention there for them. And one thing we're doing, just matter of fact, tomorrow morning we've got some ladies from our court designated worker office who will be visiting our high school tomorrow. We have a small docket of parents and students that will be meeting with them. This is nothing official to the courts just yet. Pre-complaint, as they call it. It's just sort of a way to, one thing is to put folks on notice that sometimes people just don't know how many absences or tardies that are excused their child may have. So this is just a way to make it very clear to them the situation, but also to work on some interventions to help them curb it. Sometimes it's just a matter of letting the doctor get the student back into the safe zone. So that's happening tomorrow, as we do. So we'll continue to monitor that.
complete. There's Tom.
I did have some of those late additions on there.
Okay.
If you wanted me to explain
Sure, you could.
because we did the revised BG1 for the paving project at the elementary, and that was their guidance through KDE. They wanted us to do that, so we closed that project out. So when the revision comes, that's the final of that, and then we moved this BG5 forward. And that was in order to pull those capital funds over that we did the CFR for, to put into this next paving project. So that was why we did that revised BG1, so we could pull that building fund cash over to cover the paving. We did add the BG1 paving that you had that Friday email on. To give you an update on the intermediate school as well, on the timelines. We did get some more information on the sanitation timeline for that building, and I got this really late. It was probably 4 o'clock this afternoon. So they're proposing a 6-month design time and then a possible 6-month permit time, which gives us a full year, possibly before we even know we have a permit for sanitation. That does affect our possible build timeline depending on when that comes through. Said it could be up to 6 months, could be a month. He said it all depends on how fast the EPA looks at the paperwork and gives a permit. He doesn't see a problem with any of it, it's just how long it takes. He says it's out of his hands, the 6-month design time, a month. I don't agree with it. I mean, it's a sanitation plan, how far that is.
Is the design, is it on the EPA or is it on?
The timeline for the design of the sanitation is actually on the engineers, sanitation engineers. And I'm guessing it's because they're severely backed up the project right now. But I know they're doing grants like over at Campbell County and they're doing a bunch of southern ones. They do, I mean, there's 200 engineers at that firm, I think. They pretty much do all the sanitation plans in the city. So I think they're just backed up and they're giving us a large window. I think that's where that comes from. So it does potentially have our build time pushed back. And I wanted to get that out there so at least you know that there is a possible timeline change on that building project. And that, it all depends on if, supplies break up and how fast they come in, what our lead times are on different stuff, so. And Vioxx will be out there to finish surveying the site in January, I believe. And we did do the screening for the softball fence. I want to get that out there because that's easy task. 8 to 3:30, there's 5 of us doing it, we got it done, so.
Thank you.
And that was the update I had for you.
You have any questions? Thank you, Jimmy. All right, everyone, get a chance to look at the expense report. And then take a look at personnel. Other, Dr. Baker?
Board members, as you know, we have a work session scheduled for December 2nd. And I received confirmation today. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about gaps in learning that have appeared as a result of the challenges that we've faced over the last couple of years. And I'm excited to share some information with you at that work session about some other initiatives that are currently going on in our district to address those gaps in learning. Part of that is a partnership with the local co-op for some standard deconstruction and curriculum alignment activities. We started that in middle school math, and that work has already commenced. I've been, present when that work was going on, and been very pleased with our middle school math teachers. And we're making preparations to expand that work to our high school. Again, starting with math. So I'll share more details in the future about that. I'll also be sharing additional information about something called a Young Scholars Academy. We are working with other regional school districts to give our students the opportunity to attend Northern Kentucky University their junior and senior year, where every class will be dual credit. They would receive high school credit as well as college credit, so that when they graduate from Walt and Vernon High School, they would also receive simultaneously an associate's degree or they will have completed the first 2 years of their bachelor's degree, if they're enrolled in a bachelor's degree program. So I'll share more details with you about that. In addition, some of us had a meeting with Dr. Figueroa at Gateway Community Technical College, trying to expand opportunities for our kids there. A couple months ago, we had a brief discussion about the number of our students who have access to vocational technical classes at the Boone County ATC, and they've been wonderful to work with, but they only have so many slots to give us. So we're trying to examine another avenue to get our kids opportunities for vocational technical classes through Gateway. So I have that meeting tomorrow with Dr. Figueroa, and I'll share with you the details of that. I'll say it's exciting and energizing to be able to focus a little bit more on education opportunities for kids and a little bit less on COVID. Our numbers have gone back up recently, but I'm hopeful that as our younger students now have the ability to get the vaccine, if their parents want to do that, that pretty soon our numbers will start to go back down, and we can focus more and more on learning and less and less on COVID. So, but I'm very much looking forward to that work session to share with you some opportunities for our kids.
Anything else, right? There was no audience of citizens? Okay.
I had a question, have you been reimbursed yet for the football at the stadium?
I believe we have.
Okay.
I believe we have. I'll double check that with Kevin,
Okay,
and I'll put that in your email tomorrow. Okay.
perfect, thank you.
Okay, moving into recommended board motions. First is the approval of minutes. First by Heather. Is there discussions, questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle. All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is approval of the treasurer's report.
I'll make it.
First by Heather. Discussions or questions? Is there a second?
Make it.
Second by Stacy. All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is the approval of the order of the treasurer, the bills.
I'll make it.
First by Kyle. Discussions or questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Stacy. All in favor? Motion. All opposed? Motion passes 4-1. Next is approval of the revised BG1 Walt, Vernon Elementary School paving 2021.
I'll make it.
First by David. Discussions or questions? Is there a second?
Right.
Did you make the second, Kyle, or just?
No, I was gonna have the question, so we had projected doing this at one point. So is this
This
This is the repairs.
this is just a repair?
No, this is actually to close that entire
Close
project
it because
out.
it was,
So it pays for the work that was done on that project currently, and that's what this BG1 will approve. And then we can't spend another dollar on that project. And then we pull BG5 and we'll close it out at the next meeting. Hopefully, the BG1. If Katie gets approval. So this closes this paving project completely out and gets the approval for the amount that was spent in the surveying.
you, Kyle? Okay, great. Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle. All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is approval of the BG1 Walt and Vernon paving 2022.
I'll make it.
First by Stacy. Discussions or questions? Is there a second?
This is just replacing the one that 87.
No, this is our basic maintenance at the elementary school, so it's the repairs of the blacktop that's slipping down the hill, the drain that goes in there, and then the seal coat striping and crack fill at the elementary school, and then it covers this campus with all those efficiencies we have here at the bus garage where our paving is breaking down with the drainage issues, help solve the drainage issues coming down from the bus, or from the high school gym side, a big hill where the water comes down. And then on the last time we did our paving project,
the company that was doing it could not, every time they were coming out trying to get their equipment up, it was just breaking down on a subgrade, and all our blacktops on dirt, so it's kind of breaking down on us now. And this is basically like a scratch coat across it, and then they do an 1.5-inch overlay across the whole lot, and that's to strengthen it up so we don't have that problem in the future. And that includes the basic seal coat stripe, and then across the street where the central storage and archery is, it'll widen that a little bit, that entrance. I don't know if you've ever driven in there, but it's really hard to get a car in and out at the same time. And with our thought process going in the future is that's going to be possible student parking for, towards the end of the year when we have 0 spots left every year. That'll be an overflow. And without widening that, it's not really that safe to do that with the traffic flow. And that just does the front little area there. We're not doing any of the sides of the back, that's still going to be gravel. And that's what this project is for.
So is there a second?
I'll make it.
By Kyle, all in favor? 3, all opposed? 2, motion passes 3-2. Next is the approval for an additional instructional assistant position at the Early Childhood Center.
I'll make it.
First by Kyle, discussions or questions? Is there a second? Second by Stacy, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is approval of FY 2022 KETS offer of assistance. First by David. Is there discussions or questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is approval of the surplus items. First by Heather. Everybody have a chance to look at those? Any questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Approval of the field trips. First by Heather. Discussions or questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by David, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is the approval of the driver agreement for the board-owned vehicle by K. Schweitzer.
I'll make it.
First by Kyle. Any discussions or questions? Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by David, all in favor? 4, all opposed? All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is the acknowledgement receipt of the superintendent's personnel actions regarding FMLA leave, C personnel employee number 1047. First by Heather, discussions are, well, is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Next is adjournment. First by Heather. Is there a second?
I'll make it.
Second by Kyle, all in favor? Motion passes 5-0. We are adjourned at 8:24.